Welcome, welcome. And I'm just getting to figure out this new system over here. So if you are watching this, a copy of this, which we're going to still use, I just want to let you know that, let's see how we do this. Okay, I'm sorry for the second. There we go. And we do this. And that's good. Okay. Today's lesson, I want to share with you about something called dvekus. Dvekus literally means to be connected to. And the idea of dvekus in our conversation is what occurs when a person is in a constant state of union with Source. And what that looks like is that everything that the person in this state observes, it's all within the context of observing the divine manifestation of energy as it's occurring down to its very detail. And to make note of a story as an example that may demonstrate this, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Shalom Dever. So when one day he was walking with his son, who later on would become the next Chabad Rebbe, and on his journey, he was explaining to his son, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he was saying to him, look, at every one of these leaves, there's energy. There's not just energy in it, there's a soul in it. And he went on to give him some different Kabbalistic understandings. And he was a child, without even realizing it, he was taking out leaves from the tree. And his father told him he should stop, and then told him that according to the teachings of the Arizal, the great mystic, it's possible that there are actually souls within trees, and there's a reason why that occurs, and that's for a different conversation. But for our conversation, this is a way in which we could observe what it looks like when someone is in dvekus, or often spoken dvekut. So today's teaching is within this regard, and it's very interesting because I'm going to post, when I, God willing, post this video, I'm going to post a link where you can listen to stories of the great holy ones. And this, what we're about to read, relates to why it's actually such a great idea, and it's really important that we actually do that. Excuse me. So let's get straight to it. There's a statement that our sages say that the actual mundane words of the holy ones, of the wise ones, those who are students of Torah, are words that we should study. And just as an example about that, I just heard a story which I found to be fascinating. Before I tell you the story itself, I want to tell you another story, which is why I found this story particularly fascinating. The story is that the Chafetz Chaim was a great holy rabbi that lived around 100 years ago. And the Chafetz Chaim was the one that was responsible for teaching a great deal about the importance of guarding our tongue and being careful with the words that we say. So the story is that, and I may be misquoting it, but one day the holy Chafetz Chaim was on a wagon or so with another Jew, and the other Jew began to talk with him. He didn't know who he was talking to. They were both on the way to the same city where the Chafetz Chaim lived. And the other Jew asked the Chafetz Chaim, where he's going. He told him. And he asked him if he knew who the Chafetz Chaim was and what he thought about him. And the Chafetz Chaim, being a humble person, he said things maybe he shouldn't have said about himself. For sure, no one else would say them. That's for sure. And the guy was so upset about how he spoke about the holy Chafetz Chaim that he actually hit him in the face. He slapped the holy Chafetz Chaim in the face. Later on, when this person came to have an audience with the holy Chafetz Chaim, you can imagine how horrified he was when he saw the holy Chafetz Chaim. That's a person that he slapped his face. So he just fainted. Couldn't, he had learned so much then about the holy Chafetz Chaim, and look what happened. So the Chafetz Chaim, as a result of that, actually said that he learned from the event that even about yourself, you have to be so careful about the words that you say. And that was something that became the lesson from that. Now the story tonight, what I just heard, because that brings me back to this idea of learning from the simple words of a tzaddik. So the fifth Chabad Rebbe, his father passed away when he was at the young age of 48 years old, the Rebbe Maharash. And that left the young rabbi who was married, who was already Rebbe material from a very young age. That's a longer conversation. But it left him devastated nonetheless, because his father was everything. And he couldn't deal with it. So it took a long time until he took upon himself, accepted the leadership of being the Rebbe. It took a long time. But he did already accept, certain levels, because people really relied on the Rebbe. And people throughout history in the Hasidic world very much relied on the Rebbe for matters that were very important to the individuals. So the story is that the young Rebbe is on the way back to the city of Lubavitch, where he had held court. And people didn't know what he looked like, but there was another person on the train. And the person on the train asked him, "Where are you going? Who are you?" And he just said, "Where are you going?" So he told him he's going to Lubavitch. So he said, "I heard, wow, I'm going to Lubavitch also. I'm coming to see. I heard there's a young Rebbe who's a very amazing person. Heard so many good things about him. I need to ask his advice. Do you know him? Have you heard of him?" And he's talking to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe said, "I know him very well." Now listen to these words. He said, "Who he is, he is. But to his father, he doesn't come close." And when I heard this, I had to listen to it again, because I'm thinking, wow, how profound. He was humble. He wanted to avoid that which, of course, the other story, the other way to respond, to say something negative. He was really humble. So what a beautiful way to put it forth without having to deal with, the pride otherwise associated with it. So that would be a good example of learning from the words of the Talmidei Chachamim. All right? So, what the Holy Baal Shentov says, the point and the reason why we learn from their words is not simply because they're wise people, but the idea, this is really something that when you think about it, you really process it, you can actually take it to the task, which I'll share with you in a moment. But the idea of a tzaddik, of a holy person, such as the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, the idea of a tzaddik is that he's always in a state of dveikus. He's always in a state of union. So everything that is occurring, he's in a state of union. What it means to be a state of union is a very long conversation, because how does one occur when one is in a state of union? How does one respond to things that otherwise they would respond differently if they were truly in a state of union? Being aware that at this very moment, the very breath that we're taking is a new energy that we're so present to. What would that look like? Well, that's what it looks like in the speech of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, which is why we we don't just learn from their teachings, but we learn from their behaviors and we learn from their speech. Even when a tzaddik speaks about the most mundane things, he's always in a state of dveikus. Now, let me tell you an example of that comes to mind. Our Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is a story that happened in the 60s, I believe it. There was one time that there was an amazing, filled energy, whole season from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur through Sukkot. And Simchas Torah was so over the top that the room downstairs was a mess in the morning. So the Rebbe's secretary said to the Rebbe, perhaps we should pray in a different room because downstairs is cold and dark. Maybe he said dirty. And the Rebbe, like, almost turned white. And he didn't understand when he said it wrong. What's so bad about that? He has another room, there's a clean room, and etc. But that evening, when all the Hasidim gathered together, and it was a joyous evening, don't get me wrong, but the Rebbe said it can't be that I should hear about the room, that all this energy takes place through a whole month, and words like cold and dark should be associated with it. But the guy didn't mean that. He meant cold and dark. He meant cold, physically cold and dark, or whatever it was. But the point is, because a tzaddik, like the Rebbe, is in a state of union, so therefore when he hears those words, that's what he hears. Because everything we hear, we're supposed to hear a lesson, there's a reason, there's no, you understand? In other words, this takes being present to a whole new level. That means that every time we hear a word, even if the person says something to us that's absolutely not true, but it's true that you still heard it. That means the divine force, for whatever reason, wanted that, yeah, you should hear it. So what does that look like for you if you take that into your heart? What does that look like for you? That's being present to being in the state of dveikus. He says that tzaddik, and I'm telling you, this is something you can actually observe and study. But the tzaddik, even when he does a mitzvah, he has to make sure that he's not doing whatever he's doing out of habit, because then he's not in the state of union. So the service of being in a state of union is a service that permeates every part of them, even when otherwise you think, of course, they're in a state of union. It's a mitzvah. They're doing a mitzvah, of course, they're in a state of union. But the tzaddik, even then, is in a special state of dveikus. And this is why the sages advised the Torah scholars to always find words that would be the shortest amount of words necessary to impart any particular idea. And that's because since a person is in dveikus, a person's in a state of union, so if they have to share something that's just technical, then why spend too much time on it? Accordingly, I heard, and I'll finish with this story with the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. Oh no, this was with the Rebbe Maharash, I believe. It was with the fourth Chabad Rebbe. That a businessman came to the Rebbe crying that he really wants to learn the Torah, but it's just too much for him because he doesn't have time, because he's a busy businessman. And so he came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, the Rebbe told him that he has to find time, and It's super important because that's how you stay connected. How does a person stay in dveikus? You find you have to learn. When you learn Torah, you get the narrative of how to be present in God's presence. That's a different conversation, but super important. Anyway, the Rebbe told him, listen, if you go back to your business and take into account how much of your time that you're speaking is a complete waste, you're not needed to say that. You could save those words that are not necessary. Not necessary. You'll see how much time you could put it and start learning Torah with it. And the guy changed his life and was able to, without limiting what it was that he was doing, I'm shortening the story, but without limiting what it was he was doing, he was able to make really ample time to learn the Torah. So this is a lesson for all of us. That number one, this is what I'll tell you. You know what's so crazy about what I just shared with you, this teaching? Really, I can't explain the feeling. The fact that I've been gifted with the possibility of meeting and being present many times with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, although the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in 1994, but everything about him is so easy to go and find and observe about him. Now, think about everything I just said and watch one of those videos where you can look at on the YouTube, Chabad.org, of the Rebbe during dollars specifically, and listen to the words the Rebbe's saying. I've observed this. It's interesting. I've observed in this context, and I continue to because I'm just a student, but I continue to observe that to me what seems to be just so fantastic, to be able to actually observe this idea that a tzaddik is always in a state of union, you know? So that's very, very powerful. And how does that help you and I? Because these tzaddikim, holy people, were not just put here for us to observe their holiness, but they've also given us advice on ways that we can improve our life, that we can improve our ideas. And the Rebbe has that. There's a book called Toward a Meaningful Life. And that's something I don't have that with me, but it's something that is really a good way to take from the fountain that stays in connection, advice that is applicable to the life that we live. All right, God bless you and have a fantastic day. And God willing, we'll get this little program right, and it'll be on the Chabad of Malibu YouTube site, which is really where it should be. All right.